Welcome. We'll continue our exploration of Hebrews and what we can learn about faith in chapter 11. Let's read the first verse together. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. This chapter of the Bible, sometimes referred to as the Great Faith chapter, starts off with a two-part definition of faith. First, the substance of things hoped for. Other translations say the confidence or assurance of things hoped for. The theologian Matthew Henry explains that the same things that are the object of our hope are the object of our faith. The expectation that God will perform all he has promised to us in Christ. This expectation is so strong that it gives these hopes substance in our soul. So we begin with this inner assurance of what God has promised to do. In the second part of this verse, faith is the evidence of things not seen. This can be described as a certainty that there are realities that we cannot see with our physical eyes. It seems clear from this definition that faith is not something that can be seen. However, the title of our session today is Faith Made Visible. How can that be? All that God has promised in Christ, freedom from sin, loving relationships with God and others, peace, joy, and courage in the midst of trials, are made evident in the lives of those that walk by faith. This is explained in verse 2. For by it, faith, the elders obtained a good testimony. Their faith was visible in how they lived their lives. Who are these elders? The rest of the 11th chapter of Hebrews chronicles these faithful men and women of the Old Testament. Let's take a look at these examples. Abel offered a sacrifice to God with a heart made righteous by faith. Enoch pleased God by faithfully walking with him and being obedient to his will. Noah persisted through the hostilities of those around him when he built the ark, out of godly fear and faith that God would bring the flood. Hebrews 11 continues listing heroes and heroines of faith. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, and Rahab. Even the author states that he has run out of room to tell all the stories he would like. So what can we learn from these ancient people? The all-encompassing lesson is that faith makes people act differently than those around them. Abraham's faith gave his life purpose and destination. His destination was the land of Canaan. Our destination is one that we should pray for daily. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Abraham and Sarah's faith in God's ability to give them a child, and then through God's request to sacrifice that child, showed that their belief in the fulfillment of God's promises transcended death. This is also reflected in the faith of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, whose examples speak of death and things to come. Even though they realized that they would not see the fulfillment of God's promises before their death, they still oriented their lives and the lives of their children in anticipation of that promise. How patient is your faith? Do we still have faith in God's promises, even if they are not fulfilled in our lifetime? Moses' life teaches us about doubting our faith in God, referenced in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you, except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. As the Israelites were fleeing Egypt and were faced with the Red Sea, they began to question God's will for them. to leave slavery behind and go to the promised land. They said, "For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness." But Moses had faith in God, and by faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians, attempting to do so, were drowned. Sometimes we are tempted to lose faith in God when difficulties arise. Yet those who walk by faith dare to obey, even despite apparent obstacles. In verses 32 through 38, the author of Hebrews starts to summarize those that he did not have time to write about. We hear of those who triumphed over fearful odds, those who were mighty in battle, but also those that were tortured and killed. For the faithful, the material things of this life were secondary to their faith in the promises of God. Faith in God doesn't mean that everything will be easy and perfect in life, but it does give us the comfort that we read of in 1 Corinthians. But God is faithful, and He is faithful to us. And that is really the true lesson that we can gain from this chapter of Hebrews. Not only the lessons from these men and women of the Old Testament, but first and foremost, that God is faithful. Their faith in Him was fulfilled by His faithfulness to them. This chapter, therefore, is not so much a record of man's faithfulness, but rather a beautiful and visible history of God's faithfulness to humanity.